So in our previous video, we talked about creating your advantage. We talked about value, but here's where it gets fun. Because once you realize what your advantage is, once you realize what value you have and how to apply that value over time in a way that's increasing, that your skill set's increasing. It's one thing to do it like 1 week, or it may be one thing to do it through a quarter of a year. But imagine having that mindset applied over and over and over again, where you take these principles that are so powerful, but you do it repeatedly over a long period of time. We're all on our own journey. And so the beautiful part is you may be thinking, I wish I would have known this sooner, or I'm looking at where someone else is and I want what they have. But I'm here to tell you that the really cool thing is you are right where you are, and that's right where you need to be. And no matter where you are or how you've gotten there, you can move forward from this point. So your journey and your path, though it winds differently than someone else's, and maybe it goes over hills and through other valleys, you've got a path that's ahead of you. And so if you'll take these principles and apply them, they'll add value to your life and to those around you. Part of this whole next area is we're talking about playing the long game. So that if you're taking your advantage, but now you're doing it over time, it's going to create increasing value for you. And so imagine, and I don't know how you can do this, but maybe ask yourself, if you think about the work in front of you, how far out are you typically looking? Like, are you looking at what's going on in the next 2 weeks and where you need to be? Or are you looking maybe a couple of months out? Is it possible that you're looking a couple of days out, or maybe you're looking a couple of years out? I wonder if you could take a second and just think about, as you think about the work in front of you, your job, your career, typically how far out are you looking? Write that down. One of the things I'd love to encourage you to do is to go out further. I believe that one of the powerful parts of this section will be having a longer term perspective. Whatever you came into this video and however far out you're looking, if you can extend that out, if you were looking 1 year, if we can get you to look 3 years, if you were looking 1 month, if we can get you to look out 6 months. And you may say, why? Well, there have been times where I've been in conversations, or I've seen others' perspectives where they've gotten frustrated. But I knew, maybe because I was a little bit further down the path than them, that they were just looking for results too early. And that if they would do certain things, they would actually open up more doors, but they needed to give it more diligence and they needed to give it more time in order for these things to work for them. And again, we're working in an age where, like, being diligent over time, it's not sexy and it's not what people want to talk about. I was just thinking about, I love hearing about the 7-year-old world champion chess player, or the 10-year-old YouTuber that's making, $4 million a year, in the audience that they have, And if you're like me, I hear about that and I think, what am I doing with my life? Where am I? Where did I go off the rails, and how did it turn out so wrong for me? So it's really important that, yes, there are those stories, and those are going to catch the headlines, and that's all true, and they're prodigies, but there's also different paths, and what we got to do is we got to start where we are with what we have as we go forward. So the first perspective is to think about your work as a journey, as a path unique to you, but how far out can we go? And if we can go out a little bit further, then maybe we see the steps that we're walking through, and maybe it demystifies the process a little bit for you. Sometimes I think about this, and we can see where we are as a snapshot. So if you took a snapshot of your work life today, And I think this is what happens to a lot of us. We take a snapshot of where we are, and maybe in that snapshot, there's lots of things that we want that we don't have yet. There's responsibilities, maybe there's compensation, opportunities, roles that we want that we don't have yet in this snapshot that we're looking at today. But if we can think about it again as a journey and we can see out, then what we can see is the snapshot of where we are today is a step that we're on, and there are future steps that we will be taking in order to get some of the things that are important to us with our career and with the work that we're doing. So think about it as a journey, not a snapshot, thinking about it as a path. For me, the job that I took was I started out by being an intern and doing a lot of part-time assistant work. It was not bad work, it just wasn't what I ultimately wanted to do. And then when I graduated, I took a job as an assistant, and I was doing a lot of things that ultimately weren't really what I was passionate about and desiring to do, but I knew that this would get me in the door. It would allow me to learn the language, it would allow me to be in the environment, it would allow me to learn the skills and the concepts that would then allow me to take that next step. And one of the basic skill sets that is powerful in a lot of life, but especially in this area, is seeking out counsel, seeking out wisdom, being willing to ask, what does that path look like? That's the job I want when I'm 35, and we kind of want to reverse engineer it, if it's 45 or it's 50 or whatever the age may be, however far down the road it may be. But what is that role that you're aiming at? A lot of times people have come to me and talked to me about careers in the finance industry or wealth management, and they just want to learn. And it's great that I think most people are willing to share ideas, share about the industry with others that want to learn. So be willing to ask, be willing to be curious, to learn about the job that you want, and then learn about the path and the steps that you can take that are going to be in that direction. Another really powerful concept is earlier in life, say yes to a lot of opportunities. Say yes to something that you think is interesting. I was talking recently to someone who had an experience to be able to, this was in like the early 90s, and they asked about, hey, we're doing something on the World Wide Web. She knew nothing about what the World Wide Web was, but she got in there and learned about it, and because she did, she developed a skill set that really set up a lot of her future path. Be willing to say yes early on to things that you think are interesting, challenging, things you might want to do. So early on, you want to do that. Then later in your career, it's going to become more important on what you say no to. You're going to need to say no a lot. So say yes a lot early on, say no a lot later on. And what that means is you're going to get leadership, you're going to get skill sets, and more opportunities are going to be coming to you. And you need to be increasingly intentional about where your time goes. One of the major convictions that I have in life is that time and energy are limited, right? And so the time that we have in work is limited. The time in our week and in our year, they're very limited. And that's a healthy perspective, because then we need to be very intentional about where we apply that time and that energy. So early on, we've got more things to kind of figure out. We're trying to really learn about the world around us. Then as we learn more about our direction, then we're getting more and more specific to the things that are important and really convictions for us. Later on, I really like this idea of don't say yes to something that's interesting later on. Say yes to something that's compelling. A lot of things are interesting. Many less things will be compelling for you to decide to spend time on them. Another big perspective about early and then later is early on, be willing to do the hard things, then easy. Because if you try easy, it'll then be hard. Let's say you spent extra time learning about skills or developing skills or refining your craft than your peers, right? It probably, in a lot of cases, will then make your path easier later on. And it doesn't mean that you go on cruise control, but it just means that the seeds that you planted early, if you planted more of them, they're going to bear fruit for you later on in ways that are probably different than those that didn't. So that may be learning, it may be going to a conference, it may be having conversations, it may be meeting with mentors, it may be doing a little bit of extra work, it may be putting in more hours on something that you need to really develop and grow in. But be willing to do the hard work, and especially understanding that there's a process that you want. You don't want easy then hard. You don't want to not plant the seeds that later would be the trees and the fruit that you would need. So be willing to do the hard, and knowing that it sometimes will and often will provide opportunities later that will make things easier. Likewise, when you're earlier on, go broad. Like I said, be curious, say yes, experience things, try different jobs, talk to different people in different types of industries. And then later, learn your path, learn what resonates, learn how you are yourself going to integrate maybe 2 or 3 component parts into your work and into your career to then be more narrow. So go broad, then go narrow. Don't know where you are in your path, but what do you need to be saying yes to right now? And maybe you need to spend a little extra time learning and experiencing some things to say yes to. Not even sure if it's going to work out. One of the most valuable things that I said yes to was wanting to be a pilot. And I went far enough down that road to know that if I was going to take a solo flight and if I made one mistake I would die, that being a pilot was not for me. One of the most valuable things was knowing that I didn't want to do that anymore, because then it allowed me to go forward towards, well, if that's not it, then what is next? Whereas if it were out in front of me for years and years and years, then it would have kind of been in the way of what was going to be on the other side. So saying no to something, even if you spent time in it, can be very valuable. And don't feel bad about saying no to something that you've come to a place of conviction about that's not right for you and the path that you have. But what might that be for you? What do you kind of need to say no to in order to move forward to the other side of it? What is the hard thing that you need to be doing now that will be the seeds that you're planting for the future? Kind of like we talked about in a previous episode of what is going to be the things that I need to do to be a beginner again. What's going to be the things that you need to do now that are somewhat hard? It's extra work, it's extra time, it's extra effort that will then further the path that you have for yourself and make that a little bit smoother down the road. And then finally, where are you on your path of broad versus narrow? Have you gone broad enough, or are you in a time you need to keep going broader? You need to keep learning, you need to keep exploring, or are you in a time when, you know what, you've been saying yes to a lot and you need to start saying no? When you look at your schedule, there's a lot going on, and it's probably not sustainable. There needs to be a lot more no's to things, and exploring what is compelling versus what is just interesting for you in your work life. Hopefully this is helping you look further out, having a better perspective. We often say that the longer term perspective you have, the better decisions you're going to make today. Imagine, high schoolers maybe that are looking only to the weekend. Who knows what kind of decisions they may be making. Maybe they're great, maybe they're not. But then later on, maybe if we're looking 3 to 5 years down the road, maybe if we're looking 5 to 10 years down the road, that allows us to make better decisions today in terms of who we are and who we want to be.